Hello, everybody, and thank you, May-Lin, always for these grand, grand introductions that I'm always humbly thinking how to respond. But I am really glad actually today to see that we have a participant also from Estonia. That is not only me. So Mert, welcome if you are there, and we have been in previous sessions talked quite a bit on GovStack and microservices based architecture and services, and I'm sure that we will get into more detail in these issues also. But I'm joining you today from Luxembourg, from yet another hotel room. I hope that the internet won't fail me as it didn't last time in San Francisco. So I'm really happy that you have taken the time to join us in these spring hours that we might already feel that we do not only want to talk about serious things as democracy nowadays is, and how technology influences it. And this is the reason why I'm also here for this event, for looking on how to drive for European sustainable democracy. And I'm very much also looking forward to the work together with all of you that we can also discuss later today, as there is one freer or more open time slot to discuss together what and how we want our network and ourselves to contribute to this increasingly challenging task, actually, to keep internet free and open and democratic, and not only in this very timely context of the war, but hopefully soon also beyond it. So this is from my side, and I don't want to keep it longer. Meanwhile, we can all think of how we want also this network to mature, and as you have been here more than a year, and hopefully more active participants than I was in my very first year to discuss it. But without further delay, I'm very happy to welcome Marco Obiso from the International Telecommunication Union. I am wondering, yeah, he's also already here. So welcome, Marco. We are all looking forward to hearing more about the developments of UN Secretary General Digital Cooperation. I do not know whether you have plans also to talk about the new tech envoy selection process that we are also some more actively involved than the others. But Marco, please, the floor is yours. I don't know whether you have also some slides to share.
No, I don't.
No, great.
Hi, Nele. Hi. Thanks a lot. Hi, May-Lin. Hi, everyone. There is an old colleague of ours, Gary, also on the call, which is nice to see him again after a long time. So, well, I don't know what kind of updates you are expecting from me. Of course, I mean, we are one of the agencies that are part of this multi-stakeholder effort on the digital cooperation roadmap, and it goes well without saying that, you know, we are following closely 2 or 3 of the tracks that are let's say encompassing the overall digital cooperation roadmap. On the selection of the tech envoys, I think all of us are anxious to understand when finally you know we are getting, you know, the person in office. So I don't know, and honestly I'm not personally following that. So but what I can say is that there is, of course, a little bit of ramping up of the efforts on the digital cooperation roadmap, generally speaking. ITU was engaged and is still engaged in mainly 3 pieces, which are, you know, the connectivity one, the digital capacity development one, and let's say the the kind of a data economy in a sense, which is around the measuring meaningful connectivity. So we have been working on coming up with a baseline, which is now adopted and approved by the group. And Nele knows that we have been using this also on another group that is also kind of interacting on how to let's say to mainly use this as a reference document. But on the two other areas, on the connectivity, of course, I mean, we have been the baseline was one, and then we have advanced the discussion because this was a track that was co-led by ITU and UNICEF. And one of the main products there was, of course, GIGA, which is, let's say, a connecting school project done together with UNICEF. Not only, but this was one of the main outcomes of the connectivity piece together with the baseline. On the digital capacity development, I think end of last year, we formally launched two pieces. One was the multi-stakeholder network on capacity development, which is supposed to be a multi-stakeholder effort, engaging, let's say entities that wants to provide, support to the community at large on digital capacity development. So this was launched. A line of principle supposed to be handed over to the Tech Envoy office once that, the Tech Envoy is in service, and once we have a clear understanding on how the UN Secretariat wants to run this. But together with this effort, we actually put together an initial database on the capacity building effort that are happening. I'm going to post on the chat the URL, so maybe you can have a look into that. And then again, this is an open network, which is not ITU or UNDP or any. I mean, it's really across the board. So lots of entities from private sector and academia express interest to participate. The governments also. So feel free to have a look and see. I mean, if you can actually support just simply even just adding into the database the effort that you are making on digital capacity development, because that's something that is important for the people in need. There was another piece of the work that we had done with UNDP as a kind of a bilateral let's say effort, which was the launch of the joint facility. So the joint facility again is a construct that supposed to help let's say mainly national administration and government to ramp up digital transformation and to kind of catching up on the effort that they're making, which is very much linked let's say, Nele, what you were saying about the GovStack. As you know, ITU is one of the let's say the entities, one of the actors on the GovStack project. And the idea there was really to try to stimulate, let's say, this kind of matchmaking between demand and supply on digital capacity development, and try to let's say, again, understand how two organizations of the UN system, ITU, UNDP, and possibly together with others, we can make available our expertise at the service of the government's needs. So that is something that also we have launched in December. Now we are carrying on in kind of harmonizing our service offering to make sure that we can make this available to, let's say, to governments and possibly also to let's say to other entities and also within the UN system. So that is mainly what I can say at the moment. But I don't know if you, Melin or Nele, you have specific questions on the efforts that we are participating again together with the others. I really would like to stress this element of let's say really making, I mean, engaging into this as part of the community, because it's important that we just break all these borders of I'm doing this, you're doing that. I think the digital cooperation roadmap was something that was really bought by the community at large, by everyone. Government were there, private sector was there, industry was there. There were a little bit bumps in the process because of again, nomination of the Tech Envoy, and then the UN Common Agenda came into place also, which we are trying to integrate in a sense in terms of the concept, because also the UN Common Agenda is talking about digitalization. So the UN Secretary General is very active on this field, and then we're trying to also help as specialized agencies, all of us, to to kind of make sense of what the whole constellation of initiatives that are happening. And I guess that this discussion we are having here could actually help dialogue and could help, streamline some of the efforts, so really, really helpful, and really happy to be here. Yeah, so that's it from me now. I'll just give you back a few minutes of the allocated time, so maybe we can have a conversation or something that where I'm not the only one talking, right?
Thank you, Marco. I think you've brought up quite a few issues, and particularly actually for the broader audience, both you and Marco and Nele are very familiar with the concept of the Office of the Tech Envoy. And then you've also referred to the election of the Tech Envoy. I think for the broader group, it'd be helpful if both of you could help to elaborate what is that role? Why is it important? And what are we looking for the Tech Envoy to do from the UN side that could be helpful in all the many challenges we face in the digital era?
I don't know, you want to go ahead, or you want me to initiate the answer and then you complement as you prefer?
Yes, please start, and I will then complement. But of course, I have also an insight as let's say an expert in the area, but also representing Estonia in this matter partly. So I have these two
two hats. All right. Okay. So let me give you the short version of the whole long history of the digital cooperation roadmap. So this was an initiative that was launched by the UN Secretary General Guterres to again trying to really harmonize and streamline and maximum all the different efforts that were across the UN and outside UN on digitalization and on digital transformation, right? So in a nutshell, the idea was to try to come out with this concept, with this roadmap that could actually lay down programs and could allow a long-term sustainability on how the UN at large is engaged into the digital transformation process, but also how we could, let's say, facilitate and also harmonize, the efforts that are happening between the UN and then the industry and then the academia and all the other, let's say, entities that are part of the overall process. So there was a consultation, there were lots of calls, lots of roundtables. All this started with an expert group that was put together to define, the kind of a possible recommendation to be given by the UN Secretary General. Then the UN Secretary General took all this material on board, and then he came out through his office, of course, and together with him with this document that is the Digital Cooperation Roadmap. Now, in order to basically implement the roadmap, the Secretary General took the initiative to come out with the concept of having an office within his UN Secretariat, within this office, basically, which is called Tech Envoy, which was supposed to facilitate, the interaction and the discussion among the different groups, among the different tracks, because the roadmap is composed by different tracks. There is one on AI, one on cybersecurity, one on connectivity, one on digital capacity development, one on digital public goods. And I don't know if the group is aware, but I can share, a link to the digital cooperation roadmap itself. Yeah, 8 tracks. I don't know who is providing this, but it's very useful. Right? Or maybe it's you. Okay,
always,
perfect. There you go. So 8 tracks.
Keeping everything.
Exactly. So basically, the Tech Envoy office again is really like a facilitator, within this group, because of course they don't have the capacity, nor the expertise, nor the competence to run the whole show here. So the idea was to actually have this office again managed by a Tech Envoy, technology envoy, like all the other UN envoy, to facilitate the work of all the different entities that were being assigned to, let's say, to a specific track. So that's what I can say at the moment. I just need 1 second because I have someone, and then Nele, maybe you can jump in, and then I'm coming back in a minute. Really, in 30 seconds. Yes. Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Marco, and thank you, Meilin. I think very nicely summarized what was our expectation was actually the harmonization of digitalization, because the digital governance or digital transformation, it's not really a rocket science, and it is actually much simpler than it may seem, or and it should actually very easily be done in a lot more united manner than it has until now. That has been also the development cooperation has been very fragmented, and in this light, I think the UN efforts really to harmonize digitalization and digital development came at a very right time, but unfortunately it has a little bit stumbled now in this process of selecting a tech envoy, as the previous process failed, and the new one does not seem to be proceeding as we had hoped for either. And let's see whether the selection will proceed. Until now, to my best knowledge, the interviews have not yet started. But what I wanted to say that nevertheless, I am glad also that these different 8 components have proceeded. They all have, of course, proceeded in very different, I would say, speed. Some have been more active, some not. Actually, the very one Estonia is a champion on trust and security has, for example, not been that active as the one on digital public goods. And Estonia also announced its joining with Digital Public Goods Alliance 2 weeks ago, and in May Estonia should be ready with a roadmap for Digital Public Goods Alliance. But basically, what we will do, we will simply keep continuing promoting the development and the essence of development of open, but also open source based digitalization, and promote, of course, some of what we have been doing, but more the philosophy behind it. And this is also part of the harmonization process. So when I was listening to you, Marco, I was also thinking that many of the things that are done, for example, in this digital capacity building, could also be interlinked with also what the Digital Public Goods Alliance is doing, because there is still not enough information, or there is also quite a bit of misinformation on digital public goods. And I think I saw here Joseph from Oslo. Here we had a brief chat after Estonian's announcement that we would also need now a more harmonized approach to digital public goods as such. So perhaps we could also discuss here how we interlink all these different activities that are going on within the UN digital cooperation roadmap, which it is what it was created for, but also within this digital public goods network, which is also expanding, and there could be already quite a bit of ambiguity over what it really stands for and what is needed. So that is perhaps an update and what we think about the process, but definitely we have high hopes for the process and the UN Tech Envoy that should have a very big role in it.
Great. And with that, we've come to the part of the presentation, which is mine. So I'll just introduce what I'm going to say, which is I want to let this whole group know about what's going on with the G7 and the G20. Because while there is a lot that's happening in the UN system, and it is a complex ecosystem unto itself, there are other things going on in parallel. And we have had the opportunity, our network, the Digital Cooperation and Diplomacy Network, have actually been participating in this. And I felt it was timely to let you know about what's been going on. So I'm going to share screen. And try and get it to the right size. Okay, and then start the slideshow. Okay, does everybody see it? So what is the Think 7? Think 7 is the policy development process for the G7. And I put here the members of the G7. I'm glad they wrote the names because I can't recognize the flags. So the G7 is now what is the entity. The G8 was included Russia, but they were, after the Crimea invasion, were out. And then Russia is part of the G20 as well. So those are the members of the states, the G7 and G20. And I'm showing this so that we can go to, where's the next? Okay, great. So during the development of what happens in the actual discussions of the G7 and the G20, they've been meeting at the finance minister and central bank level, and then now the leaders of the countries are now involved in both the G7 and the G20. So it's become quite a complex process. So I've actually shown here what the Global Solutions Initiative has been doing to support the Think 7 and the Think 20 process. This is the policy development process. Global Solutions Initiative it's actually out of Germany, and they're working closely with the University of Toronto in Canada. And this gives the how it happens each year. There's an inception meeting where they discuss what are the policy areas of concentration. Then the invited think tanks work on policy briefs and abstracts. They have a summit where the different themes are discussed in person. And then following that, more integration, more refinement, more focus of the work on the policy briefs. And then there's a summit. And that then is handed over to whoever's the president of the G20, in this case, Indonesia this year. And this is an equivalent process going to happen with the G7, and the briefs will be handed over to the German G7 presidency. And then there is the actual G7 and the G20 summit, and then it moves on to the next year. So this is the overall process for G7 and G20. I'm here in Berlin, and I came here to actually attend the joint T7 and T20 summit almost a month ago. So it happened in between our last DCD meeting and this one. Now, this actually took place at the ESMT, which is the German Business School. It's in the former Chancellery building. It's really very important office across from the Berlin City Palace. It was quite intimidating what a high-level meeting it was, because Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, came in person. And so the security was actually very, very tight. So we had 2 days where Indonesian task forces and G20 task forces and German T7 task forces all met in the same building over those 2 days. And I'm just giving you an idea of the different engagement groups that happen in the G20 process and how long they've been going on. So the Think 20 has been going on since 2012. But this year is the first time that the German G7 presidency asked for the same Think 20 process to happen for the German G7 presidency of the G7. So it's not clear whether it will continue on every year with the G7, but it was considered very valuable by the German government. And it was particularly valuable this year because of the new government, with Angela Merkel stepping down and then Olaf Scholz coming on. Being able to get policy briefings from think tanks around the world was considered very important for the G7. So here's how the Think 7 process works. It's experts from think tanks and institutions from the G7 countries are given basically a charter. Here's what we think is important. Germany set up 5 different areas, and we'll look into them. And each of the 5 areas has 3 co-chairs, and the co-chairs are connected to the policymakers in the G7 countries, and in particular, in this case, Germany, which is chairing the G7. So then the policy recommendations are under development right now. For the G7 process, Germany has set up 5 areas, and you can actually look them up in the this URL here. So climate environment is, and remember, this was launched at the end of January before the Ukraine invasion. So at that time, climate was the overriding priority for Germany. And then global health, international cooperation for global common good. And this is very, very overlapping with digital cooperation, as well as the concept of social cohesion, economic transformation, and open society. So you see a lot of the themes that Germany has set up for the G7 overlap with digital cooperation. Whether or not, if there had been a UN tech envoy, they would have been involved with this, I don't know. But the thing is, I was there because I was brought in by the Hasso-Plattner Institute. We were one of the think tanks involved in proposing publications. And so I was in the room. And as somebody in the room, I observed certain things. In all 5 of these areas, there was no discussion of digital. I'm gonna let that sink in, how concerning that was to me to know that the existing think tanks were not bringing the digital issues to the fore. Here are the number of papers that are published in the public website: 15 on climate, 12 on social cohesion, 10 on global health, 10 on international cooperation for the global good, and 5 on sustainable economic recovery. I actually know they're going to be more than that. They're just, that task force is slow in publishing what they're working on. So I'm moving on to the next slide. Due to, maybe you could call it an excess of enthusiasm, but really my own concern that digital was not represented, I pulled together various teams in order to create policy briefs for the Think 7 in the area of digital. And I'm sharing them with you here just so that you know what we were able to do, but it was a short fuse, and people had to act very, very quickly in order to do this. My hope is that by giving attention now within our DCD network to how the process works, that we can be more prepared in future policy development for both the G7 and the G20. So this first one here, and the slides are in the link in the thing, and you can download the PDFs as you like. This is what brought me into the room, because I was invited by the Hasso-Plattner Institute to co-author the Clean IT process. And just by being in the room, I was able to actually join the other task forces. But even in the climate environment task force, I noticed the lack of having, for example, the IEEE in as one of the think tanks able to provide ideas. So I nominated Michael Lucan and Alpesh Shah from the IEEE, and they proposed a policy brief. And what I also noticed was that the the policymaking was at such a top-down high level that it seemed really important to be able to engage at the bottom-up level. A lot of what we talk about is stakeholder engagement, including the very people in the communities. And so this community climate clubs begins to say, how can local people actually be involved, and what is the information that they need to know so that they can understand what the climate challenge means to them. This next one was within the Social Cohesion Task Force, and the concept of digital utilities where data is shared rather than owned by the whoever is the entity that collects the data. This idea of data sharing, data as a public good for scientific research. We pulled a paper together, and it's really thanks to the people of DCD that all these papers were possible, because I essentially just put the space in, we need a paper, and then the people came together to actually create this paper. The next one is the one which is most significant for our digital cooperation diplomacy, which is that we were able to put in a paper on digital public goods for health. And this is, the people here were all part of the GovStack initiative, as well as participating alliance partners from PATH, from WHO, and from two of the authors from GIZ. It turned out that the global health people were especially appreciative of this paper, because this was the only paper in the global health group which had authors from the WHO. So Derek Muneen and Garrett Mahey were both from the WHO. They were brought in by Sky Gilbert. So there's so much that I think we are adding and able to add to policy development at a global level. I wanted to show you what was going on. And then finally, Tamara Singh, who's on the board of the People's Internet and Internet, and she was the Asia Pacific lead for UMFIF, the central bank think tank. She and I contributed to the central bank digital currencies, which is really where finance and digital overlap. And we proposed that, and this is an idea that the ITU has been talking about. Sophie Maddens from the ITU had talked about cross-sector sandboxes. And basically we put that idea into the policy brief for central bank digital currencies. I'm starting to wrap up so that you know where this is going. The Indonesian Think 20 began with the Global Solutions Summit just last month. The main goal is to address not just the COVID pandemic, but these problems, which are really high priority for us, the Digital Cooperation Diplomacy Network, inequality and the digital divide. So my suggestion is that people here in this group should look closely at the T20 task forces, which are all named here. There are 9 task forces, and quite a lot of them have overlap with the digital cooperation roadmap, 8 tracks. And what I am summing up as a takeaway from this presentation is that digital cooperation was missing from all the task forces at these high-level G7, G20 meetings, except that the social cohesion policy brief, there was one on data citizenship. And we were asked to do the peer review because there was literally no other group there which was equipped to do a peer review about data citizenship, which really shows you the lack of people at digital at this policy making level and how important it is. Our network has critical cross-cutting impact on digital topics. And so I think, Vince Cerf, when he joined with me to help to get this together over the last 2 years, it was never our idea that this would just be a talk shop. We wanted to do something. And in a way, Vint has thrown the sort of baton, given the baton to us to say, what are you going to do? I help you get started. I've put you all together. I've invested my time to help you start to know each other. But now it's time to do something together, not in silos. And so my proposal is that we should together look for more opportunities to engage. For example, the Indonesian T20. And the calendar for the G7 is here. There's the Think 7 Summit next month. And then the G7 Summit will take the products off that, and that will end up in the ones that become agreed to will be in the communiques between the ministers of finance, the ministers of health, the leaders. It's interesting, this G7 process this year, because the UK's G7 process last year, they did all of it by themselves, meaning that they didn't have an international Think 7 process. So this is the first time the G7 has engaged. Then I've given you also the G20 calendar, which has its global dialogue next week, in the next couple of weeks. And all G20 countries are invited to attend. It's open registration. So if you're interested, you can do that. The dates that I want to bring your attention to are that the German G7 meeting is in June, whereas the Indonesian one is in November. And the Think 7 and the Think 20 process will continue between those two dates. So as much as we've done policy briefings up to now, we have a chance to integrate what the G7 and G20 do, especially in the area of digital. And this is a very, very important year for the world, because not just of the Ukraine war, but the recovery from COVID, the potential of inflation, the food concerns. There are many, many issues in which digital could play a role in making the recovery better. So I just put in the appendix of this our peer review of data citizenship, where we took what was a fairly abstract policy brief and tried to put in actual implementation issues, which Sid had encountered inside looking at, India has actually done this whole digital identity and linked 250 million bank accounts. And so knowing that means that we have a chance to put in real practical issues into the discussion. So that was my summary. And we've got time later for discussion. And I noticed there's things in the chat, and I'll respond to that. So back to you, Nele. And unless actually, I think I may have allowed enough time for more Q&A.
I think there is a bit of time always, and it's very important process that you, Meilin, explained. And actually, yes, Matthew has also a hand, because Matthew also posted potentially not so good news in the chat. So maybe Matthew, you want to comment also, ask from Meilin.
Matt, go ahead.
Thank you, everybody. I'm Matt Gamzer. I live at the International Finance Corporation, of the private sector arm of the World Bank, and I've been a participant in the G20 finance track for the last 10 years. I posted some stuff in the chat that I'm not going to repeat, but I wanted to say just briefly that it shouldn't be surprising that the good news is that the G20 pays a lot more attention to digitalization than the G7, because the G20 represents the world today, whereas the G7 maybe used to represent the world economy, but for quite some time has no longer done that. And that's not a critique of, it's just a statement of fact. And the countries in the G7, these digital issues are much less important to them than they are to the Indonesias, the Indias, the South Africas, the Chinas that represent the G20. Unfortunately, the likelihood, and I have no direct involvement in this as a representative of a multilateral agency, but the likelihood that the G20 is going to proceed as normal this year is very slim. There are discussions underway right now that are not going to be conclusive. And I think as a result, we're going to see a number of countries suspend their participation in the G20. And I don't know what the end result is going to be in a very technocratic area like financial inclusion where I work on. There are certain things that we can keep working on, but the big picture long-term things I think are going to have to be put on hold for a while, which is a shame, because I think the G20 really is the natural body going forward to try to take on these issues. But that's, so I don't mean to be too negative, but I just can't see we're already seeing, even in our technocratic area, how schedules are disrupted, how plans are changing, and nothing is definitive at this stage. But certainly at the president and finance minister, central bank governor level, it is not going to be business as usual in the G20 this year.
Thank you, Matthew. I think Mark also, you wanted to comment, ask a question from Mail-in.
Yeah, no, I can chip in a bit because we are a little bit more involved as Matthew was saying, as multilateral organization. We are actually one of the knowledge partners of the G20, and we have been doing this since a few years now. I agree with Matthew, about the difficulties this year on the possibility to run a G20 as business as usual. The Indonesia are trying to do the best to ensure participation and attendance, but the good thing is that, and I put it in the chat, the G20 historically has this permanent construct, which is called Digital Economy Task Force, which is now are going to be a digital economy working group. So since Saudi and also the year before, they want to move this into a permanent working group talking about digital economy. And one of the three priorities identified by the president is actually digital transformation. I'm still talking about the G20. Yeah? So there are three priorities. One is global health architecture, the other one is digital transformation, and then the energy transition. So these are the three priorities that the G20, let's say, presidency highlighted. And I think the work around the digital economy, within the digital economy working group, and also on digital transformation can be a good link to the work that this group can do, And also I agree with Matthew that I think the most appropriate venue to inject inputs is the G20 rather than the G7, which is a little bit wider in terms of participation, and it's also more, I can say, welcoming, from let's say entities that are not necessarily, the governments, right? Even if it's still a governmental structure, because the G20, attendants are mainly government representatives. But since there are always to track the financial and the Sherpa track on the finance, as Matthew was saying, there is a participation of the industry. But I think that could be a way of how this group can provide feedback, specifically within the digital transformation priority. Now, the mechanism, that's up to the Indonesian, but I don't know. I mean, if there is a need to facilitate, maybe we can have an offline discussion here. But the work is progressing. So on the digital economy and on the digital transformation, there are lots of, let's say, pieces that in the presidency is putting together. Maybe there is a venue for this group to inject an input. Yeah.
Mail-in, would you like to reflect back?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think this was clearly my first year in which I could see some of how the sausage is made. And certainly over the last few years, I've been working with the UN and the World Bank to understand how digital is considered. The ability of this group to do it in a way which we were inspired by. So Vint helped to found this group because he said that at the beginning of the internet, it was very hard for institutions and corporations to understand what this meant for them. And what was important was to bring the people who did have a sense of what the future could be into dialogue and discussion. And that was key for how the internet was able to spread back over the last 40 years. And so our hope for this group was to provide a place where people from around the world could actually come together and hear about common issues and common problems and see how to tackle them, where perhaps inside each institution, you can't get your idea out because there's so much inertia. But if you can see that, oh, that corporation and this institution and this academic group could together actually move it forward, he really, I understood from him, I don't think he has ever explicitly said this, but it's about individual people coming together and understanding how to make the connection. Because when you're in this sort of frontier space, you can't rely on institutional principles. You're really having to work things out. But you can't do it alone as one person. But if you can find other people who are able to think at this level about some of the pressing issues, that then you have a better chance of having a more robust solution down the road. And so I'm using this time to say, this is the hope of what our DCD group is for us to, yes, there's all the UN process, there's the digital cooperation, there's the G7, there's the G20, but we within our monthly group have the chance to kind of hear what is practically going on. And I actually helped to facilitate a call between Sid Shetty of the Digital India group and Chan Chiling from Singapore today. And they're both working, you know, a lot on digital identity. It's such a complicated thing. And it made me realize that this is perhaps an area that DCD might be able to help in the future to have people hear about what each other are doing in these sort of emergent, nascent areas in order to cooperate better down the road.
Thank you, Mei-Lin. I completely agree, and I would also like to add that despite this very unfortunate moment that we are currently facing, I see actually here a new opportunity for digitalization, because at least in Europe, when I follow these political discussions or even discussions at the technical level, that were perhaps before considered the privilege of a few innovative or few wealthy countries, or just digital developments nice to have actually now really been taken seriously, and finally the essence, for example, in digital identity, like Mei-Lin was also pointing out, the right to have a digital identity, what it actually means at this present day is completely different what we thought it was 2 or 3 or 4 years ago. So definitely there is a moment to use here, and I don't know also the mechanisms how to be involved, but I'm sure that there are better people here in this network who can help us out. But with this, I think Cora, you want to say something very, very short before we give time also to Steve to talk about new things in ICANN. But please, Cora.
Yeah, no, just a couple of reactions to based on what we have been talking for the last 15, 20 minutes is, even though we are more connected as a world, we are more disconnected. It is very clear that, education, training, knowledge, dissemination is of the need of the hour. That's one thing which is very clear. At the same time, there are things which are impacting us in the world we live in terms of cybersecurity and its impact, and lack of appreciation of the challenges that brings at the table. So even though there may be a pause in a way, I see that as an opportunity for us to continue to come together, which is what we are doing, and then specifically work on some what I call sandbox projects. And then I can get into it later on what that means, but allows us to actually do some proof of concepts, to do some more than just the 7 papers or the 10 papers which Malin has put together, which I would tell everybody to read because it'll give you a good understanding. So I just wanted to comment, and I see this as an opportunity, and I actually welcome the pause in a way. That's all for now.
Thank you, Cora and Steve. With a bit of delay, the floor is finally yours, and we are looking forward to hearing more of the updates on domain name system and also the issue around internet and some of the activities of ICANN, but we can also discuss of the reactions of some countries and companies later if we have time. So please, Steve.
Thank you very much. You can all hear me, I hope. And it's possible to share the screen, or you can show my slides. Either way is fine. If you have a copy of them, so that's maybe what you prefer.
Steve, please go ahead and share your slides.
Well, the question is, how do I do that?
If you
Because I
can't,
don't know
then
that.
I will try. Okay, you start talking. I will work on getting your slides.
Well, the first thing I want to say is that I'm coming to you from the Washington, D.C. area, where it's a nice spring day, a little chilly, but the weather is warming. I woke up feeling quite good and energized. And then I find that I have to follow you, Malin, and that is a hard task. The amount of energy that you bring is just incredible. So I will do what I can, but you set a very fast pace. I'm going to talk mainly about the second topic, about questions that have come up about disrupting Russia's access to the internet, either through DNS or through other means. But since I'm here, and since the reason why I attend these meetings is related to the main work that we've been doing at the Edgemore Research Institute with generous contributions from PCI and from Google. And the project that we have, we call Project Jake. I briefed it before in October, so I'm going to do very, very quickly here for just as a quick reminder, and happy to follow up or provide more information. And the other aspect is that we're kind of in the middle of a big push, and I hope to have some more interesting news to show at a later time. So just a quick recap. We're focused on a very particular problem, but it has a generalization. And the particular problem is the access to the registration data related to domain names. So when you register a domain name, you supply a bunch of contact information and other details. And over a long period of time, practices have evolved in a kind of unplanned way to provide access to that data. And then in the last few years, the heavy emphasis on privacy, obviously, of course, due to the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe, but in comparable regulations in other jurisdictions as well. Big emphasis on privacy, which has restricted access to this information. What hasn't happened over a 40 or almost 50-year period is a top to bottom re-examination of why is that data being collected, what should be done with it, how it should be managed, who should get access to it, and so forth. And we've been involved, we've been spearheading an effort to take a very fresh look and to develop principles by which policies could be put together, not so much to create the policy that we say everybody should have, but that we can provide tools, techniques, vocabulary, concepts for bringing these discussions together. So this picture shows the collection. Can I? Is my mouse working? It works for me, but it won't work for you.
No. What do you want to show?
No, it's fine. Oh, that's fine. Over on the right side, the registrant, symbolized by RT, provides a bunch of data, which is symbolized in the multicolored pieces below, to a registrar. And then some of that data goes up to the registry, and then it's published in the public DNS. That's the way the DNS works. But it is the access to the registration information that is of our concern here. Next slide. And as I say, it's all evolved in a very unplanned way with a number of troubles and limitations. A lot of issues about the privacy of the data, about misuse of it for harassment or for other bad things. A lot of issues with respect to whether it's complete or accurate. And now there is regulatory risk from GDPR and others. So it's a question of how do you resolve and bring all the different parties together so that it's not just a losing proposition all around. So we've, as I said, been doing a very deep dive into the basic concepts. I won't take you into very much of it here, just next slide. But it leads to a more elaborate picture in which there are a more complicated set of arrangements and various mechanisms, each one of which symbolized with the star with a G, each one of which has some degree of governance associated with it. Sometimes the governance is a fully fleshed multi-stakeholder model, and sometimes it's as small as a single clerk making decisions. But one way or another, there is a decision process that's driven by a set of rules, sometimes explicit, sometimes implicit. And what we've been working on is a way to bring all of that up to the surface so that you can see how the parts interact with each other, provide explicit representations of that, and then try to provide forums, venues, and encouragement for the various parties to get together. Next slide. So, as I say, this is the primary focus, but one of the stretch goals, as I say, in the human resources business, is that the models and framework that we've been developing can be adapted and might be applicable to a range of other data access and data control processes throughout the world in various areas, not just the plumbing of the internet itself, but in many different domains. So that's the very fast recap of what we're working on. As I say, plenty of willingness to engage and talk about this. And my hope is that at some point, not the very next meeting, but not too long, we'll have some new things to say about all of this. I'll pause just briefly if there's any quick question that anybody want to ask, or I don't see any hands going up. That's good. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So I think the reason why I'm on the agenda this time is because of the current events and principally related to the domain name system and Ukraine and Russia. Next slide, please. So on 28th of February, the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine sent a formal letter to the CEO of ICANN saying, please remove the Russian top-level domains from the internet. The letter covered some other things, but that's indicative of the kind of thing. And 3 days later, less than 3 days later, Joran Marby, head of ICANN, wrote back and said, no, we're not going to do that. And the actual letters, I give a small print here, but you have a copy of the slides and you can pull them up. But go to the next slide and I'll show you kind of what it looks like. So this is the incoming one. This is the one from Ukraine to ICANN. And the words that I pulled out from it that are in there are revoke permanently or temporarily the domains for RU in Cyrillic, but I use the I speak of these using the Greek words rho, phi, or .su are the current top-level domains for Russia. And as you see, it's addressed to Marby. And the next slide, please. And Marby's reply, in polite terms, says, we can't do that. That's not the way we work, and we don't do that. And now I'm going to talk a little bit more about what goes on underneath the covers of all of this. If we look at the internet infrastructure, you can think of it as having a number of layers. And I've listed these from the bottom up, except that on the slide it goes from top down. So the bottom layer are the transmission paths, the wires, the cables, fibers, etc. And those are controlled by the internet service providers, the cable operators, and so forth. The next layer is what I call the routing layer. This is where the internet protocol addresses and closely related but less well understood are called so-called autonomous system numbers, and then the routing protocols that take place deep within the internet. So if you hear about what's the path from one place to another, usually talking not only about the physical path, but also about what the topological path is from one internet domain to another internet domain. And then at the next layer up is the domain name system. These are the what we're all used to in seeing something like people-centered internet or ICANN.org or something like that. And that gets translated into an IP address, which is the preceding layer. And then above all that are things called certificates, which are issued on behalf of organizations and various assets that they control, like websites. And you have then third parties that keep lists, both white lists and black lists, that if your software is configured to consult them, it will give you advice as to whether or not you should or shouldn't be going to those sites, and or you can even enable them to actually preclude you from going there if it's blacklisted. As you can see on the right, before you do that, before you switch, on the right, it's not all a unified, integrated set of controlling organizations. And in fact, at each one of those, except for ICANN, well, even at ICANN, things are, even at that level, there's more distribution. There's multiple organizations. So, for example, the regional internet registries allocate IP addresses, and in Europe, that's RIPE NCC, and in North America, it's ARIN, and in Asia, it's APNIC, and so forth around the world. All right, next slide, please. So let me go back and say a bit more about the request to remove .ru from the root of the domain name system. It's actually a topic that has been in the air for quite a long period of time. And it's a topic that comes up in two closely related but kind of almost opposite concerns. One is a given country, whether it's Russia or some other country, may be worried that such an action may be taken against themselves, and they may worry about what can they do to protect themselves, or how do they know that it won't be used against them. That's on the defensive side, if you will. And then on the offensive side, you have exactly the kind of thing that Ukraine asked for, or that gets discussed quietly in various settings. Maybe it should be used as an offensive tool to disrupt network access for some country. And the question then is, how effective would that be? How advisable would it be? What are the consequences of it? So there are a number of things that one can discuss about that. I want to take up two aspects in particular here. One is the technical aspect, which I think many people who like to have this kind of discussion don't fully understand. The image is, boy, if we take .ru out of the root, then Russia is off the internet immediately. The answer is no, that's not the way it works at all. What's in the root zone is a pointer that says, if you want to find out what the addresses are related to .ru, go over to this other server and it will tell you all of the domain names under .ru and so forth. And that entry is in what's called an authoritative server and is copied into a bunch of recursive caching resolvers around the world. So when that piece of data is retrieved, it's kept after it's retrieved so that the next time it's requested, you don't have to go and look it up again, you already have it. And in order to make sure that that data doesn't become stale, there's a timer put on it so that after a while it gets looked up again. How long is that while? Typically for this kind of data, it's 48 hours. So if you removed .ru from the root, there would be a gradual decline of access to that information, but not an abrupt immediate one. And so it would decline at the rate of approximately 2% per hour around the globe. So in the first 5 minutes, hardly anything would happen. In the next 5 minutes, hardly anything would happen, except for one thing. Within the first 5 minutes, everybody around the world would have been told about it. This would rocket around the world faster than any piece of information you've ever seen. The fact that it's happened would become a very big deal. And out of the woodwork around the world would come system administrators and other technical people, and they would find a way around it. They would patch their software so that it worked anyway. So it would have negligible operational impact and not behave as imagined by somebody who just says, well, if you take them out, then they stop working. The answer is not at all. And on the other side of it, the political impact would be absolutely enormous. It would, I guess the next slide talks about it, yes. So what would be the longer term impact? Well, it would undermine the credibility of ICANN. It would undermine trust of US stewardship of these processes. It would provide very strong pressure to move the control of the domain name system away from its current management, probably to the UN or perhaps in some other way. And it would have a potential for splintering the internet. It would be a very bad day all around. Now, there have been multiple attempts, more than attempts, actions under other circumstances to remove a country from the internet. During the Arab Spring, Egypt and others were occasionally removed for short periods of time from the internet, and it's happened occasionally around the world. It is generally a net negative in the sense that even for regimes that want to control access to the internet or cut off access by dissidents, it has such other negative consequences that it's not a very helpful thing to do overall. And in addition, plenty of people find a way to get some degree of connection otherwise. So that's the basic picture. But within all of that, let me share an anecdote. I was at a meeting in Russia in, I think, 2007. It was a Russian network security meeting. I was coming as a representative from ICANN. And in addition to having group discussions about various network security things, I was asked to have a side meeting, a one-on-one meeting with a senior Russian government official. And he just had, I was told he just had two quick questions, if I could just answer them quickly, informally. He was leading the delegation that was going to the Internet Governance Forum in Brazil later that year, and he was preparing for it. What were his two quick questions? Well, what would happen if the U.S. took Russia out of the root, and what would happen if the U.S. took Russia off of the internet entirely? And if I could just give him quick answers to those, he'd be happy. I felt like I was standing in front of a trap door and asked to just take one small step forward. It won't hurt at all. So I assured him that the processes were arranged so that that doesn't happen. and I didn't take him through all of the details of what I've just said here. But I was thinking that if he could cause the U.S. to make such a mistake as that the reaction would be so favorable for Russia that he would become a hero of the Russian Federation, and he should do everything he could to cause the U.S. to stumble like that. That was my thought at the time. And so I was kind of amused in a way to see that the exact same idea is still popping up and taken seriously, even though it is completely the wrong thing. And I will also note that a comparable idea that one could imagine is, well, why don't you take Russia off the telephone system? Just disable country code 7 so that no phone calls can go anywhere in the network. I've not heard anybody suggest such a thing, nor have I heard it suggested for other countries, other circumstances. So cutting off the infrastructure it does more damage than it does any good. It's not a very effective, it's too blunt an instrument, if you will, as an offensive weapon, and it's sort of like a knee-jerk reaction. On the other hand, and the next slide, please. One could come back and ask, well, are there more focused, more narrow, more specific, and more effective kinds of things that one might do? And the answer is that's a more reasonable discussion. That is, instead of trying to take an entire country off the internet, one might focus on particular facilities, military facilities, or other critical infrastructure facilities that are more related to the goals that you have in mind. And so one of the topics that's under discussion is trying to create new mechanisms that are multi-stakeholder and have the not the unilateral effect of a government deciding to do something, but have more of a community effect of advocating that certain areas be targeted, and a complementary check on that by having others decide, yes, that's a good idea, so that you have both a propose and dispose cycle as opposed to a unilateral command and control approach. So one such proposal was spearheaded by Bill Woodcock of Packet Clearinghouse, excuse me, and several of us, I think 40 of us, signed on. I signed on as well. And here I put up a selection of the key points from the letter that was circulated, which is use community-driven mechanisms instead of government imposition, and match the sanctions to the goals, and have it be an advisory process, if you will. So in essence, a kind of a blacklist sort of on steroids for that. So those are the main things that I wanted to share with you in this setting. I hope I haven't used up too much of our time, and I'm more than happy to have any discussion that you want to have about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Steve. We have a hand here, but I simply wanted to comment from my side that it seems that the world is keeping to the principle of not disconnecting people from communication. I believe there was recently a license from the US not to include any technologies that support communication, even email, under the economic sanctions sort of package. So it seems that that we are supporting this principle in all domains. But I see that Kuri would like to have a comment or a question to Stephen on this very timely matter, please.
Nele, thank you. Steve, thanks so much. Thanks for unfolding the responsibility and the stewardship that is that the operators and the stakeholders are burdened with. My question is slightly on the legal side, even though I come from technology. So can a US presidential order or a US Congress mandate, can they mandate such a removal, which will require the operators or ICANN to comply to it?
Well, the first thing that I'm compelled to say is I'm not a lawyer, and I try not to play one even on Zoom calls. That is a concern that has been expressed, and I've actually put a certain amount of work into thinking hard about that in a way that I'll say in just a second. ICANN is serves the entire world. It doesn't serve just the U.S. It's located, its headquarters in any case, is located within the U.S. And one of the questions that's been thought hard about is, should it be moved somewhere else, or should it be located in a bunch of countries, or should it be reconstituted under a different, in a different way as an international government organization, or should its functions be put under the UN or ITU, for example? Quite a lot of work was put into those kinds of questions, a lot of exploration. One of the things that emerged very, very strongly is that the U.S., and some of this I'm pausing because what I'm going to say, I have to clench my teeth a little bit, but the U.S. generally has a very, very strong rule of law, and is respected by most countries as having a strong rule of law, which means that you don't have arbitrary actions that violate what the rules are. I don't know what it would take for the U.S. government to do what you're suggesting. It hasn't, and I haven't heard any suggestion that it has or that it's thinking about it. And in fact, quite the opposite. As you just heard, there's been a very, very strong understanding that this would be a poor thing to do, not just for the internet, not just in domain names, but generally email and phone systems and postage and so forth. So the U.S. has a very strong history of not doing that, and I doubt strongly that such a thing would happen. Could it conceivably happen? That's kind of a long discussion. I'm a technologist, and so one of the questions that caused me to think about this when I was first confronted with the thought several years ago, as I described, was could we build even stronger protection? And I think the answer is yes. I circulated some ideas about how to build a system that you fundamentally could not overrun in that fashion. And I've not found very much interest. I found interest among a few people who understood the problem, but I found quite a lot of either lack of interest or resistance because it just doesn't seem to be the most serious and big problem. But one could use modern tamper-proof hardware and cryptographic processes that would put a very, very big barrier. It would make it impossible to do it abruptly, and it would take days to weeks as opposed to seconds or minutes to make such a thing happen. And when you can stretch something out that far, it changes the character of it. It becomes much less useful in the scenarios that we're talking about. So I don't know the answer to your legal question, but the history and direction has been a deep, deep understanding that that would be a bad thing to do, a violation of all the principles that have been set up. And as I said earlier, there is also, I think, a pretty good understanding that if it were done, that it would have such negative consequences that you'd be very unhappy with the result afterwards. Is that helpful, Yuri?
I think that's wonderful for people to actually be able to hear from you, Steve, with the experience that you've had really from the beginning of the internet. I think it's a privilege within this community of digital cooperation and diplomacy to be able to hear, from the source of people who help to shape what the internet is today and how you see things. So it's extremely valuable for us to understand this, and I'm glad we're recording it as well.
Yeah, let me as long as I've had it, let me add one additional thing that I just recall. A little more than a decade ago, there was a big question about getting adding the DNS security extension to DNS, so-called DNSSEC, added to the domain name system, and in particular, adding this cryptographic signatures to the entries in the root zone. And there was a bit of controversy about it when the Department of Commerce was not eager. In those days, ICANN operated under the auspices of Department of Commerce, but it doesn't anymore. It was sort of released from that in 2016. And there was difficulty getting Department of Commerce to agree. Department of Commerce was responding to pressures from various parties who thought it was too expensive or unnecessary or didn't solve any of the bigger current problems, security problems, the internet. But it had been in the plan for quite a long time, and had been actually part of a presidential security plan for the internet over a long period of time. And I've been involved in a lot of the technical developments and in attempts to deploy DNSSEC. And I spent some time trying to understand what the cross currents were within the US government, and whether or not there were any things going on behind the scenes that might be at work that one couldn't quite see. And one of the best reactions I got, responses, not a reaction so much, was from a colleague who was in the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And I said, so you guys are paying close attention to this. What is your concern? Are you concerned? Are you desirous of being able to make changes and not have them be visible, for example, to tamper with the things? And he said, no, that's not our concern at all. We just want to make sure that nobody else can either. So their focus was entirely on the integrity of the system, not on being able to manipulate it. And I believe that that was a straight up answer. Now you can always say, well, but there's always layers and layers, and how do you really know? So all I can do is share that. I asked the question, I had it in mind. I've done quite a lot of nosing around, if you will. Never seen anything that would suggest the alternative.
Thank you, Steve. I just want to say what I have always felt and why we founded the People-Centered Internet, that the internet was a gift from people to people. And it actually happened independent of multilateral institutions or governments. And the more we can do to preserve that allows that to be what it was hoped for from the people who really did the work to get it to where we are now. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. And I would actually like to take a bit of more time, if you don't mind, and you threw into the air this. One could argue also potentially some sort of fragmentation of the internet by having, let's say, targeted sanctions and cutting off, let's say, the blacklisted organizations. So what is your opinion or take on how far we are from it, or how likely it is that it will happen, or can we do it democratically, if to put it that way?
It's a good question, and the way in which you ask the question focuses on sort of what the governance and what the processes would be, and whether you could see them and evaluate them and be deliberative about what those processes are. Let me suggest that things might be almost the opposite, in that such things will start to happen without a careful deliberation, without a framework for it all, and that it will grow in more of a organic bottoms-up way until you have enough that somebody says, oh my goodness, look at all those things that are happening. We need some governance over all of this. And so it might be actually sort of upside down or inside out, if you will, from the picture that is implicit, I think, in your question.
Yes, it was. You got it. You got it right. I was wondering whether there is already or could be a certain governance mechanisms for these kind of things, if we want to have them to begin with. Yeah, but
it is the nature of the internet, the whole, marbled all the way through it from conception to all of its instances, that it's not under a unified single control, and that it works because of a set of agreements and initiatives of every sort, from the positive innovations and creation of new applications, technology, to things like how do you combat various forms of abuse, to so forth, all spring up not so much from a regulatory framework of saying, well, should we do this or should we do that, but from people first doing it and then having discussions about, okay, now what do we do, and having these things all collide. So it's a somewhat chaotic and uncontrolled, at least first order, and then most uncomfortably for people who live in a regulatory and governmental framework is they're necessarily, and I say this with affection, always late. Always behind and always catching up.
Thank you, Steve. Does anybody else want to add? We have already introduced a slight change into our agenda. As Steve's topic interests us all, we have skipped the discussion and introduction that was supposed to start 20 minutes ago. We'll do that in a speeded way before the closing of today's meeting, and then after Steve would go straight to hearing more about the science summit of the United Nations General Assembly. But if nobody has any questions, of course we can see the recording and chat also later. But thank you, Steve, very much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure, and hope it's been helpful to you.
Yes, very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I hope now that I will do my best in pronouncing the names correct, but Declan, Kirrane, and please correct me if I'm wrong, from ISC Intelligence will introduce us the developments around the Science Summit of the UN.
Thanks, Nele. You can hear me okay?
Yes, well.
Great. Hi all, great to be here. Yeah, so I'll just talk a little bit about the Science Summit. I'll spare you a PowerPoint presentation. Lots of those hanging around. I can send one along. For those of you who don't know, I have been promoting a science engagement with the United Nations General Assembly for the last 8 years, starting off at a very humble beginning and moving, I suppose, to where we were last year, where, of course, we were online, but we did have a considerable presence and a huge range of speakers and panelists. But really looking forward to this year. First of all, the objectives around the Science Summit are really to, first of all, is to drive awareness of the role and contribution of science to the attainment of the UN SDGs and Agenda 2030 2030. And secondly, then to promote a science agenda within the context of the United Nations General Assembly, which you will know begins on the 13th of September this year. But science has not been much or any part of the General Assembly over the last couple of years. So I think it's very, very important that this happens. So to that end, we are proceeding with the Science Summit. This year, we expect to have approximately 200 sessions in New York and probably 600 sessions online. And one thing we've learned is that the Zoom has taught us that inclusion is vitally important. And Zoom has shown us that it's possible to engage and bring people into this discussion. So inclusive science is going to be a major theme. And I suppose one way to look at that is, how do you do scientific excellence inclusively? And of course, I suppose in the view of many, and myself included, scientific excellence is by definition exclusive. It really concerns about not more than 10 OECD countries, and that's it. And again, without compromising on science excellence, how do you do that involving a much wider group of stakeholders? So that's the question. We don't have the answer. We're hoping to get some answers, but I think from a pragmatic standpoint, in terms of global science, I think it's very necessary, but also more to sort of a political agenda level. It's vitally important that more communities and stakeholders are participating in science actions, and also the outputs derived from that, which are increasingly in the form of data expressions in one form or another. And I was happy that our previous speaker highlighted the GDPR, and that just makes me reflect on one aspect that we're going to be prioritizing around the summit is the impact of global regulation on doing science. And I think this is not to get into rights or wrongs, but to recognize that the pursuit of regulations, and of course the poster child for data protection regulation is the European Union's GDPR, but there are others, and of course these have far-seen consequences that are not understood. So one reason this is very important is because there's not much point in for example, sorry for the Euro bias, but the European Union promoting health research in Africa if it is at the same time adopting regulations and legislations which have extraterritorial applicability, which to you and me means they apply in Africa amongst many other places. Only problem is nobody tells Africa this. So again, these are multifaceted problems and issues, and we need to have a discussion around those, and then work at the level of the United Nations as the forum to advance cooperations to address these challenges. And of course, then we are in a very, very fragmented world. We are very fragmented in terms of regulations. We're very fragmented in terms of policies. And while I'm a big fan of the United Nations, I mean, there's many things it cannot do. It cannot regulate and it cannot legislate. And that's one reason why so many worthy UN initiatives are left on the shelf, cannot implement. So I think we need to be very open-minded, but I think there's a huge opportunity to rethink, to co-design, to engage, and to look at how to advance collaborative science to address the things we needed to address. So that's really, and just I suppose that's just a little pen picture. I'm not going to try and go into all the themes and sessions we will organize here, but we are going to promote a very global discussion on the role of development finance, to which you will know as the World Bank and the IMF, which are also UN agencies, and to promote the importance of science in the agendas and strategies of these organizations, and of course then by extension in the many other development banks around the world. So of which there are, I believe, some 300, but I mean, if anyone has a better figure, I'm happy to learn of it. But that again is just a question of looking at, well, it's not about necessarily more money or funding. It's a question of orienting and certainly bringing science into the broader SDG agenda. And to that end, we'll work also with probably about 20 UN agencies and sort of doing what they do, but looking at science. And a good example is the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, which is a brilliant forum for global science agencies. But time moves on, and there's only so many meetings you can have, and then people ask, well, okay, what are you going to do, you see? And science space is technology driven, so you've got to have a very strong research and development agenda behind that, and UNOSA does not have that, and it accepts very much the need to do it. So I think there's enormous scope there for building that, and building, in the case of UNOSA, space applications for health, for peace, for biosecurity, for biodiversity, for many other applications that we don't have time to go through today. So that's, as I said, just a bit of a pen picture. And I think Mei Lin will now talk about the digital dimension of this. And of course, we are cognizant that science is data enabled. So that's why the digital stuff is so important.
Thank you.
And I'm just going to Dorothy Gordon is asking how much, sorry, I need to bring it back up here. How much emphasis will you place on ethics of science, research and development? I suppose the really honest answer, Dorothy, is I don't know. That's because, I mean, of course, ethics needs to be discussed, but you see, you've got to define ethics. For some people, ethics is a right or wrong thing. And for other people, ethics is, did you fill out the form correctly thing, you see? And you've got two enormous schools of thought around that. And also when you're talking ethics to developing countries, it can be, and I'm just giving my experience, it can be perceived as hectoring or lecturing. So obviously ethics is part and parcel of not just science, but good policy making. So of course we'll conform to that. But I think more than ethics, I think we have to look at not ethics in abstract, but we have to look at how these regulations are impacting developing nations. And to my mind, that's probably got more right and wrongs in it than an abstract discussion around ethics. Well, again, stressing there needs to be that. But I think in what we're doing at the level of the United Nations, it's improving the enabling policy and regulatory environment. I think is building inclusion, and I think that has to also accommodate leadership from developing nations and the enabling of research leadership in those nations. So not sure if that's an answer or not, but that's just an observation. I'll certainly keep it in mind and talk to bring it up with our communities in the governance discussions they're having. Thank you, Dorothy.
So I'll jump in. I wanted to say a couple of words actually about Declan and how he comes to this, because I think this is a very important thing. He may not disagree, may or may not agree with my characterization of him, but what he did was to help South Africa win the EU funding for the largest research project in Africa, which is the Square Kilometre Array project. The picture is wrong, but it was to remind me to bring up this astronomy. This 300 million euro project encompassed inclusion, encompassed scientific education, thought about the pipelines of scientists that are needed if you actually want to have a scientific project take root. And so I just want to recognize that Declan's conception of science as inclusive is deep and broad and multi-generational. And so the opportunity to participate in this science summit is one in which many views are welcome. And here is yet another opportunity for the digital issues and challenges to be brought forward. So I put together a list. The Science Summit is not till September. We have time to actually develop panels, and the panels should actually lead to actual projects in the real world. So the list that I've put together is that we should have panels on all of the digital cooperation tracks. So we talked about the 8 tracks. These are now listed here. So for anyone who wants to work with me on developing the panels for these tracks, please let me know. The next set of panels are on the Think 7 policies that, in fact, I showed in the earlier slide set, because I felt that these were important to bring up. But it's not just about talking about it, it's what can be done? What should we do? How can these things actually take root? I know that Anir Chowdhury from Bangladesh is here. And when I spoke in Bangladesh, I talked about community living learning labs. Well, I see that the community climate clubs, if that's an initiative that the G7 takes up, this could be something that could actually be real on the ground things that happen in Bangladesh and beyond, could be happening with IEEE student branches around the world. So those are just examples of where we could take the discussions on the policy panels for the Science Summit. And then other topics, which I have just listed a few here to give you ideas for you to think about. What should we do? And Matt Arrow, I'm looking at you, digital government and education microservices. These are things that, you know, Estonia has been really a leader in bringing forward the idea of microservices in education. We should be talking about this at the Science Summit. There's also the World Future Summit that the UN is going to be putting on in 2023. September 2022 would be a good time to bring up the key challenges that we see that should be considered at the World Future Summit. So this is something of a teaser to let you know we have the opportunity to actually develop topics for digital at the UN Science Summit. These are simply the tip of the iceberg, and get in touch with me on what others that you can think of and who you might have as recommendations of people whose voices should be heard at such a forum. Thank you. Back to you, Nele.
Thank you. So just to confirm, if anybody has an idea in any of those topics, either related to the UN development cooperation or some other ideas, get in touch with Mei-Lin, and we can perhaps discuss it in the development, or let's say the further process of these in our future meetings, also to see what we will focus on and what the issues are that need to be raised. So I would like to thank all of those who have shared their knowledge with us today. As Mei-Lin very nicely introduced, our network is here to know each other and also what we are all doing, but also to take some action at this crucial point of time. So I'm very glad to ask some people today to introduce themselves and talk a bit what they do. So Ameya, Ashok, would you kindly share some of your work and ideas around digitalization, but also what we are doing here in the network?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. See you too.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you again, everyone who, as you said, who shared the knowledge with us today. Really fascinating to listen and to learn. I work with eGovernment Foundation based out of Bangalore in India. So we work mainly on building digital public goods for urban governance. I saw that Melian had a city networks theme marked out on one of her previous slides. And so I would say anything around urban governance and city networks would definitely be of direct relevance to our work. We basically work with state governments across India to support them with the digital transformation of the local government. So the way that the constitutional structure is set up in India is 3 tiers of government. So there's the union government, state government, and then city or village government. And a lot of the sort of funding and policy flows from the state to the local government. And so if you're able to work closely with somebody at the state government level, you can basically identify key functions at the city level that either let cities raise more revenue and be more self-supporting, or better deliver services to citizens, or better manage and administer their own affairs in ways that are also generating data on how people are interacting with the city, which in turn gives you a basis for thinking about what the next wave of reforms or innovations can be. And so, yeah, that's a bit about our work, and very much looking forward to any collaborations that come up from this. Back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ameya. We of course know your work also through GovStack that you also mentioned that we are part of, and looking forward to further cooperation. So thank you. We also have here today Kirrane McCabe. I hope.
I think she left.
She had to leave.
Yes.
So next time we will hear about Kirrane, and also Marcy Harris, hopefully, who also unfortunately had to leave already. But I have been chairing now this meeting twice, so it is my second time. And last time when I was in San Francisco, when it was my first time, we also met with Mei-Lin also to discuss some of the issues that Mei-Lin was pointing out, how our network could evolve. And as you are a lot more experienced in the network than I am, so we hope also to have more open-ended discussion to see how you think of the network's future. The network as such, a group of people whose voice is perhaps underrepresented, whose voice we want to hear more about. Who are these sort of missing members in this discussion that could really push for the digital society we want to have, sustain, and perhaps achieve, and also how we can do that. Some of the things Mei-Lin has also mentioned. There are different policy making processes, different policy making networks we could participate in or provide input to, either through the policy papers or some other knowledge or expertise that we all possess. But there could be probably something that I or we haven't even thought about. So it's sort of touching base with you about these future-looking issues. So I don't know, Mei-Lin, would you like to also start from your side, or as you know the network the best?
Yeah, I think we're providing a certain amount of value by having people able to join and to bring out, things like the Science Summit and other things going on. Last month, we had a really in-depth discussion about the India stack, and the month before, what was going on in Bangladesh. And I hope actually, Nele, that we can have you and Matt and others from Estonia talk about the Estonia government digital services at some time. But I want to say that my hope for DCD is to go beyond simply sharing what am I doing to how we could work together. And I mentioned earlier that I had talked with Singapore and India about digital identity. And during that meeting this morning, something came up, which was a suggestion by Douglas Engelbart that I realized could be helpful. He had a concept called networked improvement communities. And the idea is that each community is doing their own thing, like India, like Singapore, like Estonia, like different countries, Zambia, Kenya, Colombia. But on a particular issue like digital identity, it may be good to have a thematic collaboration, not to say we need to come up with something that we all agree with that we'll go back and implement, but just on a regular basis, come together to say, here's what's happening in India, here's what's happening in Norway, and then what's a common problem that we're all facing that we might be able to actually do experiments in parallel on. And in order to do that, Engelbart's idea was you have to come up with a cycle of experiments, plan, do, study, act, so that you say, okay, we're concerned about this aspect of digital identity. Over the next 6 months, we'll all try it out in our different implementations and then come back in 6 months and say, here's what happened. This process was actually done in health in the United States across 8,000 communities. And the amount of progress that could be made by doing parallel experiments meant that if 100 experiments were done, 2 might break through. That means all the other 98 could take a look at what was the breakthrough and how they could apply it in their own way, in their own community, in their own way. So this idea of networked improvement communities really surfaced again for me about something that DCD might be able to help to move forward. So I'm sharing that since you asked me.
Thank you, Mei-Lin. Any of our members who are still here and have not yet left to enjoy the spring warmth and sun, would you like to share your ideas and how you see the network and how some of these things that we want to reach could actually be done, which I think is the key question here. How do we do it once we already know what we want to do? I don't see volunteers.
I can jump in from the Nordic area, or being the German who was displaced to Norway. No, it's really for me the area of where we let thoughts float, and then we recapture in other areas to focus our mindsets. What we did now with Mert on the Eurostek, what we did in Zimbabwe with the GovStack, what we are working now in Ethiopia with the connectivities and the digital transformation centers, what we do in Tanzania with the school connectivity, same as in Kenya. So our area is really where you touch in, spread out, and by that one having this one-to-one connectivity, and I really enjoy it. When it comes to the projects, that's still something we need to, organize how we bring that up. Because Mei-Lin, I'm so thankful for you to bring up the link to the G7 and G20. I mean, being German, I'm not surprised that Germany has never ever put digital into the forefront. But that's a different discussion here.
Yeah, thank you. Germany has definitely put the GovStack high in its development agenda. So some things are happening everywhere, and I guess it's clear we cannot pass this development. But there have been also some other members whom I at least have seen repeatedly and being also active. So would some like to step in? Of course, perhaps to facilitate the discussion, myself and Mei-Lin, we can also put together a short, I would say, one page or a brief of how the network could evolve, either providing the same benefits it has, as Joseph said now, we have to have the one-to-one connection, which is also very important, but to see whether we want to do something more. So perhaps for the next meeting, we could do that with Mei-Lin and also share with you and have that as a base for our future discussions on our network. I think Mei-Lin agrees also. I don't hear Mei-Lin saying.
Yes, no, I agree, and I think we've reached a nice and natural conclusion. I think people would like to see what we're saying, and then they can give feedback on that. Thank you, Nele.
Thank you. So we will be meeting again in a month's time, even pretty springtime, and Casey will follow up with the invitations. And meanwhile, we have at least me and Mei-Lin, we have quite a bit now to do to prepare, and I'm also looking forward to hearing from you if you have any suggestions or questions, and or want to discuss something. And I'm also sure we will be meeting physically as the traveling has also started, and so as the event so the events season. So I hope to be meeting Mei-Lin in Berlin, and all of you, those who are involved in the Public Goods Alliance in June, or some other points. But meanwhile, let's keep the work going that Mei-Lin has been leading and keeping together with the policy papers, but also for the UN Science Summit. And I believe Casey will also send, as always, the recording. There have been many requests in the chat to perhaps revisit some of what was discussed today, for example, by Steve. So thank you. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in 1 month. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So happy to see all your faces. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.